And what better way to start this off, having great conversations with great photographers, than with my buddy Joe McNally right here in the Nikon studios.
Good to see you,
It's great to see you. There's a lot of construction going on here, right? Lots of noises in the building. And you bring a lot of energy here, right?
Well, why should today be different from any other day? It's
That's
like
right.
a day on location where
Right,
the lights
absolutely.
don't come on or the electricity doesn't work.
Well, while we were here today, Joe gave a great presentation to many of the employees of Nikon that are passionate about photography. And I want to start off the conversation where we typically would talk about f-stop, shutter speeds, cameras, what you choose, what you don't. We'll ask a few of those questions later on, but I really want to delve into the things within your career that were momentous and that mean a lot to you, some of the good things, some of the bad things. So, I mean, you photographed in over 70 countries, thousands and thousands of assignments. I don't know how you keep up with all that. And you've worked with Life Magazine, National Geographic, Sports Illustrated. But it made me want to ask you, in over 3 decades of shooting, how would you define yourself as a photographer when you started, and how would you define yourself as a photographer now?
Well, lots of mileage there, lots of mileage. I mean, when I left school, I came to New York City, I was a simpleton. I mean, I had no experience whatsoever. I didn't know even how much I didn't know. You know, it was beyond comprehension. When I came to New York, I was like, doesn't anybody want to hire me as a photographer? And New York, you know, not so politely said, no, no one's interested in you. So yeah, I mean, the arc of experience, the kind of patina, you know, of all those years has accumulated. Yes, I'm hopefully wiser now, more sophisticated. Certainly skills have ramped up. I remember I lost a job potentially at a newspaper because my negatives weren't good enough. You know, that was back in the day when you said, you know, if somebody could make a good neg, they were on their game, you know, and I wasn't there, you know. I didn't have a grasp of how difficult this could be or how sophisticated you needed to be to sort of make your way in this marketplace. Now, of course, I do have an idea, and there's a huge difference between that person then and the photographer I am now.
Do you feel like you shaped yourself into a style in Joe McNally photography, or you would define yourself as more versatile or a generalist?
I'm a generalist. I mean, style is an interesting question. There are photographers out there who have a quintessential sense of style, and quite honestly, and I'm not even being self-deprecating, I don't think I'm one of them. I think I become what the job needs me to become. I'm a bit of a chameleon. If I need to be like a field general and direct the action, if I need to be subtle and back off, if I need to do a big production, if I'm out there just with a camera and available light, I embrace all of it because I'm endlessly curious about the world around me when I have a camera in my hands.
I know you've often described it as a front seat, you know, to the world.
It is.
And that responsibility of delivering that story.
No matter how many times as a photographer you're told to get into the back seat. You know, stand over there. No, you can't stand here. You have to fight your way through a lot of stuff as a photographer. A lot of obstacles out there.
Sure, and I can't imagine, as the business has changed over the last 30 years, enduring in the business and running a studio could not have been easy, or is not easy. Talk about some of the changes through the 30 years and how are you enduring as a photographer in this business? I'm sure a lot of people out there would want to know.
Endurance is an interesting aspect of the business, to be sure, and oftentimes it's not really described as in a component way, you know, about being a photographer's makeup. Durability.
Right.
You have to be durable. You have to be durable mentally, emotionally, physically. Okay, you have to be comfortable with uncertainty, right? You don't know where your next paycheck is coming from. You're not sure what your next assignment is going to be or where you're going to go. Right. You have to just make peace with that early in your career, or you're going to be a bit of a nervous mess, you know.
It's funny, you mentioned the physicality of it all. How many times did you climb the Empire State Building and then you realized, I need to get physically fit if I'm going to go up in that massive photo you made of the changing of the light bulb at the top of the Empire State Building? Talk about that physicality, because you climb a lot of buildings and you shoot from a lot of high locations.
I have, over the course of time. I don't know exactly why that fell to me. I was always interested in getting my camera in a different place. I've said that often. And in the urban landscape, climbing up on these buildings can give you a very unique view. So yeah, I did climb the Empire State Building 4 times. I got aced out the first 3 times by wind and weather. I've cracked my head on a girder up there. But finally,
Did that do any damage, by the way?
well, I think it should be readily apparent what kind of damage it did.
Right.
I mean, it was me versus the building, and the building
Not much
won.
more than we're used to. I
No,
guess,
not
of
at
each
all.
other.
But yeah, I finally got a picture right before the National Geographic was closing, and it ran in the Geographic, and it's kind of stuck around a bit, you know, because not too many people get up there.
Did that physicality change the way you approached other assignments, like climbing the top of the world's biggest building, the Burj Khalifa?
I'm aware of it. I'm certainly aware of it as I've you know, gotten older in the business. You know, the necessity of just staying somewhat physically fit, somewhat flexible. I mean, it's a tough business. I mean, the gear is not, you know, easy to get around with. I mean, especially when you're a photographer like myself, and oftentimes carrying lights and stands and that kind of thing. It's as I tell young photographers, this is not a sprint. It's a marathon. Get yourself ready.
Does it amaze you that of all the beautiful pictures you've taken, the amount of great hits you've gotten socially, that a picture of your feet on the top of the Burj Khalifa got over 1 million hits?
Oh, God. Yeah, and what I get out of it? A new pair of shoes.
But it's amazing how things go viral, right?
Oh, yeah. No, there's a parable for our industry in that, by the way, you know. Yeah, new pair of shoes.
I want to talk a little bit about the emotion. You and I had this conversation when, I think it was your first book, The Moment It Clicks, came out. And we talked about that in somewhat of a euphoria, the moment it clicks. Define that to people. What does that mean?
Wow, yeah. There's a feeling, and I'm sure photographers everywhere feel it differently, you know, but I think there is a universality to it. When you trip that shutter and you know absolutely and completely that you just got what you come for, there's a thrill. It goes through your head, your heart, wherever else. I won't speculate, you know, but that's the wind in your sails, you know, for many, many days or weeks thereafter, because let's face it, really great pictures are a once in a while event, right? There's a lot of commentary out there on the internet about, oh, this is great, oh, that's great. Sure, it's all fine, it's all wonderful, but truly exceptional moments that you capture that have the power of memory, that also have what we just talked about a minute ago, durability, that stay with you, those are pretty special events. And when you get one of them, man, it's like a wave just washed over you.
Yeah, and I mean, thinking back to the film days, you saw that, you kind of knew, and at that point you had to hope that your exposures were set and everything was right. You know, nowadays in digital we get into that chimping phenomenon, but you do, it's somewhat euphoric. And it just happened to be the other night at a concert when the performer turned towards me and you see this boom, 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 and then the face lights up, you're watching it all happen, and you walk away, all right, I made my picture.
Right.
And I made it exactly the way it should be. You and I talk about this a lot, and I think it's one of the things that's most endearing about you is you kind of lay it all out on the line. And mistakes happen. We just talked about this morning, right?
Yes, yes.
It's almost inevitable that you're going to trip and fall during every shoot, right? And I know everybody sees the end result picture, and they think, oh my God, photographer's God, look at that. And you know, it's often said, you know, great photographers don't show their bad stuff. But talk a little bit about, you know, some of the mistakes you may have made, but how do you correct for that? How do you move on?
Mistakes are always with us. It's a component. It's like a piece of equipment in your bag. Whenever you go out into the world with a camera, you're going to make a mistake. It's, you know, it's almost like quicksilver, you know, the quality of what you're looking for. It's like an alchemy at the lens that has to happen. And that only happens every once in a while. And your mistakes inform your path to that moment. So you can be on a job and shoot, you know, 400 bad frames. It does not matter as long as you get that 1 or 2 frames that really do matter. You know, my old editor at Life used to tell me, he goes, it doesn't matter if it's only 5 minutes, Joe, as long as it's the right 5 minutes.
That's true, fair enough. And through the years, over 30 years, I'm not suggesting you're old at all, neither am I.
Thank you.
Anybody out there that shop at 30 years, we're not suggesting you're old at all. But you've been through a lot of transitions. Has the transition, I remember we were at the Kentucky Derby together. It's the first time you shot digital.
Yep.
I remember you putting a card in the slot of the camera, and that was new. Infancy stages at that point. Talk a little bit about, throughout your career, the transitions from film to digital, and now we're kind of in that transition from SLR, DSLR to mirrorless. Has that affected you? Has it intimidated you? How do you get over that?
Yeah, no, I think reinvention is incumbent on any photographer. You have to reinvent yourself on a somewhat continuous basis throughout the course of your career. And I do remember what you're referring to, Kentucky Derby. Fellow Nikon ambassador Lucas Gilman had to show me how to make a folder on my desktop. I mean, you know, good Lord. But to me, there was no difference really, you know. So I was putting a flash card in my camera as opposed to a roll of film. I didn't care, you know. There were still pictures being made. And it was kind of cool to sort of see it on the LCD, as rudimentary as the LCDs were at that point. You know, it was still a very, very cool event. And I just thought, well, okay, this is like another turn of the page of the adventure book. And the same thing now with mirrorless. At first, I'll be honest with you, at first I was like, you know, I don't know if I can adapt to this camera. Different form factor, the viewing aspects, the EVF is a different experience, all that sort of stuff. I thought, you know, I've been wedded to DSLRs for so long, but I took it in my hands. I knocked out a couple of fairly simple jobs with it, started to get used to it, and now I have shot probably in the last 6 months, I would say 80% of the time I've been shooting mirrorless.
And you're still shooting DSLR then? D5s,
Absolutely.
D50s?
I had a big job about 2 weeks ago. I went right to my D5s. You know,
Is there a reason why? Is it a confidence thing? Is it a durability thing? Is it a, you know, I mean, all these cameras are durable now, but what makes you choose one over the other?
I think there's a certain presence, you know, with the D5. You mentioned durability and confidence, and also perhaps even an impression factor. It was a very high-profile politician I was photographing, and we kind of made a big deal out of it, you know. And you know, I wouldn't say relegated my mirrorless to the role of being a street camera, but I feel they edge in that direction, right? A little more light, a little more versatile. I was just up in Alaska photographing. Everything I shot actually was available light, okay? And I shot all Z system, all mirrorless, because it was light, it was fast. We were trekking for a while, so the weight became an issue, all that sort of stuff. So I think every photographer has to take the pulse of a job. And then you have this array of options in your bag. What's the best tool? That's what it comes down to.
And of course, it does break down to the lenses too.
Sure.
You know, selection of lenses and all that. I was thinking, you know, we talked about a lot that first cover shot, digital cover shot for National Geographic of the jet fighter. Did you have to convince them to go digital, or it didn't really matter to them?
It was a big deal for them. There were numerous meetings. You know, my editor and I cooked up the idea. It was the future of flight. It was a future-looking story. So we thought, for Geographic at that point in time, digital was a future-looking, you know, technology, because virtually everything they were doing at that point was still film-based. So there was a lot of discussion, but they embraced it. I didn't have to twist anybody's arm. I mean, they had to know it was coming. And the D1X was, in fact, the first digital camera that I saw that came close to the quality of Kodachrome, which I had been shooting for years. And now, of course, digital files, you know, exceed the quality of Kodachrome by many yards.
As you move forward, we've already been warned, you and I, because we can go off on this tangent of 9/11 for probably an hour alone, and we don't have that much time. But it was interesting to me, because I read your book, and I read that part about Mike Piazza on a rooftop at 9/11. And it was my presumption that the 9/11 project actually, you know, the sequencing of it all, that Mike Piazza was photographed after 9/11. How did that go down, and what was the inspiration for you to push really hard on the 9/11 project? And just explain it to those that may not know about it.
Sure. The only assignment I got in the immediacy, or the immediate aftermath of 9/11, was to photograph Mike Piazza, then of the New York Mets, because everybody pitched in New York, and the athletes pitched in and tried to be inspirational. They tried to cheerlead a bit. They tried to help the city come back, and Piazza was one of them. So I took him to a roof, which in its New York, within 10 days of 9/11.
Imagine.
You know, so we went up, and the plume was still in the distance, and I photographed Mike. He was very gracious about it, and it was a somber photograph. And I came down from that assignment, and I thought, this can't be the only connection I have to this event. This is here to see if there's anything I can chip in. I'm a photographer. I'm not a firefighter. I'm not a rescue person. And I had used the world's only giant Polaroid camera just once. And I remember the stature and the power of that camera. And I went to the top of Time Warner. I had a long relationship with that group of magazines, and I went right to the administrative head. I bypassed the magazines, and I said, I can do this. give me a chance to work this camera to photograph people whose lives have intersected with this tragedy.
First responders, people like that. Yeah.
Exactly, people have lost loved ones, and they said go. And I was blessed by that, amazing affirmative response. And we moved into the studio and we worked for about 3 straight weeks. I never went further than 2 or 3 blocks from the studio because we were getting crews in the middle of the night. We were getting somebody at 10 o'clock. We were getting somebody at 5 a.m. And they would crew emotionally because people were looking. But
I'm not crossing the line here, but that took an emotional toll on you. It almost broke you, the studio. I mean, it was a difficult time.
Yes, it was very, very hard. It was hard across the board, but the kind of pact we made amongst ourselves at the studio is like, whatever we're going through right now, those folks out there are going through something that's 20 times harder, 100 times harder. These people have lost. These people are fighting their way through rubble. These people are fighting through the utter kind of chaos of the days following that tragedy. So we just said, like, don't give in. You have to sustain here because what's happening with us is just a small percentage of what's happening to them. And we have to make this studio a place of warm reception, of goodwill. People came in, sometimes they would relax, have a cup of coffee. Other times people come in, make their picture, and leave. Whatever they wanted to do, it was okay with us.
It was pretty ironic too, and my colleague Brian and I actually had a meeting across the table from it, and I brought up that Rupert in New York being the shoot, and we talked about what happened, the fact that you shot, and it's over.
One of my and her head point, the outer, and shut the power. We have another.
So fast forwarding to some recent assignments, we commissioned you to put together an assignment. You came up with a wonderful idea about performers. In fact, today on Nikon's Learn and Explore website, we launched the first segment of this multi-part project that you did with performers. So tune into that. That's a very cool thing because it includes a behind-the-scenes video because we actually commissioned a video crew to follow you around with one objective. Joe's a rock star, make him look like a rock star. Talk a little bit about performers, what people should expect to see, some of the assignments, how you pick the models or your subjects, in this case of the performers, and some of the ways you get creative and all that. How do you stay creative after thousands and thousands of assignments?
Well, I'm blessed with a few gifts, just a few, and one of them is imagination. I can imagine my way to a picture even still, and I enjoy that process. So to me, the Z6 and the Z7 present kind of a duality as a tandem. I have different assignments for them in my head. The Z7 is a high-res camera. It's 45.7 megapixels. The Z6 is more of a journalistic camera, very extended high ISO range, etc. Both share common gifts, but there's certain unique qualities that make them one or the other to me. So I thought, well, performers might dovetail well with this pair of cameras because performers have 2 lives, right? They have the life on stage where they're all full of makeup or glitter, or they're performing and they're extending their personality outwards. And then they have, quote unquote, the normal life where, somebody who's on stage in Vegas goes home and has 2 kids to get to school the next day. All that sort of stuff goes on. So I wanted to see that flip side. I'm always curious about the behind the scenes aspects of a performer's life because I've always been interested in performers of all kinds, dancers, musicians, circus people, you name it.
And
it's always been
a little bit of that in this project.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Musician from Chicago. In fact, the debut today is of a boxer and a CrossFit professional.
Exactly.
That must be so amazing.
So the 2 roles that a performer's life kind of fulfills, private and then public, seem to fit these 2 cameras well.
Would you associate that as sort of similar to D850 to D5 in the way you use those 2 cameras?
Very, very much so. Yeah. I mean, the D5 to me is like it can be anywhere that you want it, but it excels for me in the studio when I'm controlling the subject and the lighting and this and that. I mean, the power of those digital images, how resolved they are, makes it an ideal studio camera. And D5 is as you know, a workhorse.
So I can't imagine. It's going so quick. There's 30 minutes, but we have the BTS video. We commissioned Chris Hirschman, another Nikon ambassador, who is a rock video filmmaker.
He is.
And a great cinematographer. He's really got it down in making people look amazing, and he did a great job with you. But before we get to that, we did call out socially to people online to ask questions. So I want to get that in. And it starts off with at Egghead2. I didn't make this up. EGHEAD2. What is your #1 rule for shooting portraits?
Make the subject comfortable. You know, elicit information from them, do your research. I mean, this is already several things, but you have to know your subject matter before you walk in there. Read as much as possible. You know, look at every photograph you possibly can of this person, if they are, you know, a well-known entity or whoever they may be. There's always information out there, and immediately try to put that subject at ease.
At Reza, R-E-Z-A 8. Thank you for writing your question. What's your go-to Nikon lens for outdoor portraits?
Whew.
Do you have one?
Well, if I have a go-to, I would say something that goes with me on location all the time is the 2470. It's not exotic, right? You know, it's not like a 200 f2 or something really fancy, but man, it's a handy set of millimeters. It really accommodates a great deal of the kind of range and subject matter that I'm engaged in a great deal of the time. So that 2470 2.8, now with mirrorless and of course with DSLR, is always in my bag.
Yeah, this is an awesome question too, from Atman Behind a Lens. What motivates you when you're in those moments where it's hard to get inspiration for the next picture you're going to make?
Well, I could be you know,
wine, maybe?
funny about this and say fear, you know, fear of failure, which is always with you, you know, absolutely. But I'm motivated to succeed. I'm motivated. Being a photographer, actually, not too many people talk about it that much. It's a very responsible thing to do. People think, oh, wow, I'm just shooting these pictures. But no, when you're on assignment and you're taking money from somebody in return for your photographs, that's a big responsibility. You have to deliver. Yeah. You know, and that motivates me.
It's a job, and I think people lose sight of that. You know, that there's a responsibility in delivering an end result. And we were talking about that, and you had mentioned a story today when you're talking to our employees about shooting a Navy SEALs thing or some big race with the triathletes, and you were underwater and you positioned yourself in the wrong spot and had to get back on your boat to get to where they were going to go finish. I mean, stuff happens.
Oh yeah, and it can be terrifying when all of a sudden you realize, oh my gosh, I might have just really screwed up. How do I fix this? I mean, there's a lot of energy that comes from the fact that you are a professional, you've made an agreement, you have to deliver.
I think this is a great question, and this sort of goes back to where we opened up with how you thought you were, what you defined yourself as a photographer 30 years ago and now. But at Andrew_Santiago_, what do you think is the biggest struggle in making the jump from hobbyist to full-time?
That can take on a lot of different parameters, but I think there's a leap of faith, or maybe even call it a leap of confidence, to get from that hobbyist stature or enthusiastic amateur to being a professional who delivers. And one of those things, certainly, that is a component of that confidence factor that you need to amass to get behind the lens as a pro, is reproducibility of results. In other words, your best pictures or your good pictures are not accidents. You know, you can go in day after day and deliver. You can go into a bar and light it up. You can go into the studio, light it up. You can shoot on the street. You can do a portrait. You can do a sporting event. You walk into a situation, you size it up, and you can deliver, and the good pictures that result from that are not accidental. They are a product of your professionalism. That's a big thing to consider.
Outside of 9/11, any stories that sort of stand out as the epic stories you wanted to make and you were able to do it?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've been blessed to have lots of wonderful moments and meet lots of wonderful people just by virtue of carrying a camera. I mean, a couple of very complete things that were, you know, offered to me or came my way were working for Geographic in its heyday. I did a story called The Sense of Sight, which is probably the most complete story I've ever done. And it took about a year of my life. My contract to do that job was for 6 months of work. 6 months of field time. you can get very thorough. That was like being given a grant to just go be a photographer. Go and the sense of sight, go shoot the eye, shoot the human eye and what it does. I mean, how could anything subject matter wise be closer to the idea of being a photographer?
Absolutely.
It was incredible.
So I know we have the first video that was posted today that Chris shot of you.
Let me just give a shout out to Chris.
Okay.
I mean, Chris Hirschman, wherever you are.
We're middle camera, we can go right in the middle.
Middle camera, you rock.
To do what you did with Joe, you absolutely rock.
This is not easy, you know? This is definitely not easy, and you did an awesome job and put up with my antics and my this way, that way nature of my kind of ping pong machine of a mind out there in the field, you and your crew.
Following you, I can imagine, is a chore.
Oh God, it's like following a toddler.
So let's run the video.
We've been in a warehouse, beautiful natural light, and we had an amazing subject, a CrossFit athlete who just occupied the camera lens and the space with a certain athletic magnificence that has been rare for me to see, for sure. Okay, here we go. All right, so what we're doing here with Ray, who's a phenomenal boxer, he's in the Martial Arts Hall of Fame, and he's just terrific to watch. So I'm shooting a Z7, I'm shooting on consecutive high. I've dropped a focus point onto his face and upper torso. I'm in AFC, continuous, and I'm kind of rocking and rolling. The beautiful thing about having the tandem here with us of a Z7 and a Z6 was I was able to shoot high-res portraits at low ISO with my Z7, and then when he went into training mode and started moving fast and short, sharp, fast actions, I was able to go into a Z6 mode and push my ISO. So I'm finding this to be a great team. Z7, Z6, both of them are in my bag all the time.
So that was pretty stunning, and certainly Chris, amazing job on the video, but he did take a great subject and make a great video, so I will step back and say that. I have to ask though, at any point in time though, did you suck in your gut and pop the pecs while you're trying to shoot because you got 6-packs and 12-packs and you got guys rolling 80,000 pound tires on set? How does your mind go? Do you diet after that or you go to McDonald's?
No, I just, I'm so far out of their league. There was no hope, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, Joshua Cummings and Ray James, big shout out to them, phenomenal athletes. I mean, subject matter for days and days, right? Mm-hmm. Because their physicality, their expressions were wonderful. So, one final question. If Joe McNally wasn't a photographer, what would Joe McNally be? Annie's husband. All right, that's I get the whole gushy stuff. I think you would be a firefighter. Me, I'd be a drummer if I wasn't into photography or Nikon. Firefighting would be, having grown very familiar with FDNY, I just think yeah, those guys rock. When I was a kid, I read a lot of Jacques Cousteau books. Mm-hmm. I might have tried to have been an oceanographer, but I probably would have had problems with the science. Yeah, you and I have both admitted that the brain capacity is just somewhat limited until we move on to the next thing. A little more intuitive. Well, you totally blew my last question, which was really a last question, was what is your greatest inspiration? Oh, that would be Annie, my wife. I know Annie very well, and I don't care who takes credit for you two meeting. I will publicly take credit for the two of you meeting, because Annie took the job that I had in pro relations, pro marketing for NPS, and that was probably one of the best friendships I've ever formed. So. We can't thank you enough for being here and sharing a little bit. I wish we had an hour to do this, maybe 2. We could laugh a lot more and we tell more of the backstories like Virginia Keys and things like that we won't get into. Let's not. Right now. But we totally appreciate you guys tuning in. Thank you guys. I wish we could have gotten to all the questions, but we couldn't.
but thank you for submitting them. Again, a great moment here with Unscripted in the very first episode, and we will have more. Tune in next month, and we're going to have Nikon Ambassador Dixie Dixon coming on in September, so look out for those dates. We can't thank you enough for your loyalty, for tuning in, and please bring that passion. Shoot every day. Make great pictures, and we will see you next time.